So I want to talk about the value first, though, of siloing each of your functions and figuring out their flow state. And I think one of the things to acknowledge is that when you're matching skill with challenge, and I know there's this idea in some type communities that you can be just as good at your third and fourth function as you can be at your first and second. I've seen some people indicate that. But I think this goes back to the idea of certainty. Mm-hmm. We've done podcasts on personality types and certainty or uncertainty. I think the one thing that we never let go of when it comes to our third and fourth functions is, at least with our third or tertiary or 10-year-old function, there's always going to be this niggling doubt of uncertainty. And then on our fourth function, or our inferior, what we call the 3-year-old, there's always going to be deep uncertainty. Well, that means that when we're doing an activity that lights these parts of us up, even if we have developed enough skill, maybe we have developed because we've been trying to get over the sense of uncertainty. So we've been developing a bunch of talents or a bunch of skills and competencies and capacities and tapping into tools that help, become better at whatever that is. We never let go of the sense of uncertainty. So the things that put us into flow with those functions are the things that for a moment, they quiet that question. They are at a skill level where we go, okay, I can handle this. This is something that's not so far out of my capacity that I'm that sense of uncertainty is getting even more amped up. And that's important. So with our driver dominant function, we almost always feel a bit overconfident. This is, John Beebe would call it our hero function. And it's like the right tool for all the jobs. And so things that challenge that first function is going to have to be something that our sense of overconfidence doesn't believe is too simple for us. It's going to have to be enough of a challenge that part goes, ooh, like I'm not bored. This is actually challenging this part of who I am. And it's meeting what I believe is a lifetime of, first a talent, but a lifetime of skill development. It's meeting that idea of, I should be good at this no matter what the situation is. So something that really throws you into the deep end when it comes to this function, that's oftentimes what makes people feel like, okay, that's a sufficient amount of challenge for my first function. And a lot of times when people are bored with life or kind of dysthymic or, unsure of whether or not this is a thing for them, it's not enough challenge for that function. So it has to, the activities that put you into flow have to be truly at that level. When it comes to the co-pilot or the auxiliary function, John calls this the archetypal energy as a parent. So I've noticed that what puts us into flow for this function is not only sufficient challenge, but also a sense of helping others. It's contribution. With our first function, it's like that piece isn't as necessary in order to feel good. It just has to work. For the second function, it has to feel like we're serving somebody else. We're parenting them in some way. We're sharing insight and wisdom. We're helping guide their decisions in life. That's usually what makes us feel good in that function. So it's not just challenge. It's also contribution plus challenge. That's usually what puts somebody into a flow state with that second function. With the 10-year-old or tertiary, that third function, this tends to have an overcompensating nature because it's the first time we feel uncertainty. Our first two functions don't really feel uncertainty as much. Our first function doesn't feel any uncertainty. In fact, sometimes it should feel more uncertain and it doesn't. The second function is a little bit more modest, but it's usually looking for enough feedback to go, okay, I'm on the right path. I'm not uncertain, but I'm going to get feedback from the outside world to indicate like, yeah, this is the right advice, or I'm modeling the right behavior. When you get to the third function, that's when you feel uncertain. But John would call it an eternal child. And the business of children is to be loved. And so it's seeking approval. It doesn't want to reveal the fact that it's not as good as it could be, or it's uncertain about how good it actually is. And so that overcompensating nature means that when it comes to that function, we have a tendency to kind of bite off more than we can chew because we're trying to prove ourselves there. We're trying to prove to the world that we're good at this thing to get the approval and the head pats. So we tend to, we go one of two ways here. we tend to choose activities that are too stressful for this function to really be in flow. Or the other side of it is that we ignore it altogether. We don't want to feel that sense of uncertainty, so we just kind of push it away. I think this is most often seen when a feeling function is that third function. I mean, probably actually it's seen when other functions are there. But when, like an ITJ type might have introverted feeling or authenticity as this function, and they pretend like they don't have emotions or that it doesn't matter to them, that's them pushing this away. Or they're trying to show up with all of this emotional sophistication. Like they have really super high emotional intelligence because they've worked on that. And then they bite off too much.
Yeah.
So the important thing with this function when you're looking for flow is to find something that's actually at not just its skill development, but also at its comfort level in uncertainty. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. The word idealistic comes up here because like the example of an ITJ that pushes it away is idealistic, that they don't need to get emotional sophistication at all. They're just like, I don't need to worry about that in any way. But an INTJ or ITJ, either one, right, that brings it in and amplifies it too much and overvalues it or believes it's the right tool for the job might have an idealistic view of it as well. Mm-hmm. So I think the idealism, and this is how it works for me, I think it works for you that way. It's like this threshold. It's hard to know what the right balance is because I think the idealism gets in here so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. With a 3-year-old function, the inferior, John would call this the anima or the animus. Usually this function goes into flow when it's satisfied, but it's not pushing it too hard. So what we're mostly looking for in activities here is where it feels paid attention to at all, because we really do have a tendency, since this is a place of deep uncertainty and it never gets any better. We're not even trying to overcompensate with it. We're just deeply uncertain in this place. So we very much tend to push this part of who we are away. That's why a lot of Jungian psychoanalysts call this the beginning of the shadow, is because it's the first place where we really tend to, all the content that lives in here for us, we don't really want to look at it, and we make it unconscious for ourselves. Even though this is still an ego-syntonic part, we still identify with the part of us, but we don't want to see the content that lives in there. So oftentimes when we go into flow state, it's a very gentle activity for this function. Like for introverted sensing or memory as my, 3-year-old inferior animus function, it's usually very passive. It's like I'm in a comfort place. I feel safe. I might be watching a lot of content on Netflix. It's a kind of a passively entertaining place. I might just kind of, I might feel like I need a moment to not feel like I have to figure everything out moment to moment. I just feel like, I'm rooted. I'm in my comfort zone. Everything is okay. I've created homeostasis. It's all going to be fine. I can't have too many of those moments. That won't be flow for me either. But when I experience that, that is generally flow for me.
Yeah. And all types have this. INJs, extroverted sensing or sensation inferior, maybe a long bike ride or walking on a treadmill. Something like this could possibly put somebody into a flow state. It's a low impact activity that's repetitive, for those types. I think of IFPs, maybe doing a strategy turn-based game of some sort might be a flow state for extroverted thinking or effectiveness inferior. I could go down the list, but basically each one of these personality types has something that will put this inferior or 3-year-old into a low impact, low stakes environment that can feel like flow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And it's finally getting some attention. So just the fact that it's getting attention feels like flow for it.
Yeah.
But it can't be too strenuous. It can't, like the weight can't be too much for it. And so it's really, I think, critical for a person to find these siloed, incidental experiences of flow for each of the functions, because sometimes we don't even acknowledge that muscle in us, even though it is quote unquote egosyntonic. We identify that's a part of us. It doesn't mean that we're paying attention to it. It doesn't mean that we are being intentional. It doesn't mean that we are integrating it into our lives. And it's very easy when we experience something that we know is bringing a sense of uncertainty and that we are not naturally good at. Like it's seasoning or peppering our personality, but we're not like naturally amazing at this thing. It's very easy to marginalize it, to say it's not important, it's for other people, to outsource it, to just kind of go like, that's not a thing for me. But we need to do that. We need to find flow states for each of these functions so that we know what it feels like at all. Like we know what a flow state in that part of us feels like, almost like identifying a muscle.
Yeah. So I think a really great activity for you listening right now is to know what activities put each one of your top 4 cognitive functions into a flow state. So you might want to sit down, identify those 4 cognitive functions and their positions and say, okay, my dominant or driver position, what are 5 things that I know of or that I speculate would put me into a flow state around that function, around that positional function? And go through the entire car model: co-pilot, auxiliary, 10-year-old or tertiary, inferior, 3-year-old. And then that list, now you have an intentionality. It's no longer just incidental. You can start to, with intention, find the things and activities that put you there and exercise those muscles, like you said, Antonia, which now, if you can weave all that together in certain activities that can hit all of those channels, now I think you're lit up to your passion, purpose, and mission in life.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes the thing we're missing, the reason why we feel low energy or we feel dysthymic, is that we're seeking flow states for some of these functions, but ignoring the other ones. And so we kind of feel like something's missing. There's just like this sense of like, oh, I don't feel complete somehow. And so identifying activities, and it's going to be different for different people. I mean, for the same personality type, not everybody's flow state with introverted feeling, even if they're both IFP types, is going to be the same, because introverted feeling or authenticity is such an enormous slice of life. It's such a big topic. So it will be different for each individual, but knowing what they are for you is incredibly important.